Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be how I made the Tibetan sand fox, and I have a video on how I sculpted this head here, so you can go and check that out on my YouTube. I'll try and remember to link it. I never do, but yeah, I'll definitely try. But basically I use Sculpey Original, so that's my polymer clay of choice when I sculpt things, just because I like the clay to be soft because I work really quickly rather than it being hard. But check out that video if you want to know how I sculpted it. So once everything's been sculpted, I normally go in and paint all the areas that are going to be exposed and not covered by the faux fur. So I use a paint called Chromacryl. It's like an Australian brand. It's just a water-based acrylic paint. It's nothing special. And you'll be able to find something in your local craft store that's similar, just a sort of cheapy acrylic paint. Liquitex is a great one. I know that's widely available pretty much worldwide, so that one's kind of comparable to this. And I usually prime my pieces before I paint anything, so I prime it with a canvas primer by the brand Rivian Matisse, and it basically gives the sculpture a little tooth so the paint can stick to it, because a lot of the time resins and polymer clay can be quite slippery. Moving on to the armature, I will be doing an armature video on my Patreon if you want to know a little bit more about this armature. But basically I'm going to be felting over this armature to create basically the muscles of the doll. So this is my 1/8 scale armature. It's quite a small doll, and this is the smallest bit, the smallest size plastic ball and socket armature that I have. There's also the 1/4 and the 3/4, I think the size was, which is the biggest one. So I'm using polyfill to felt the muscle tone of the body, and I find that works really well over using alpaca fiber. And alpaca fiber can get really expensive as well, but I find the polyfill works perfectly fine for felting muscle tone. So when I needle felt these types of bodies, I don't pre-sew my bodies like I used to. In my older dolls, I used to build it more like a plush, but for these ones they take quite a bit longer, and I find that they have a better refined muscle tone and body shape when I do it this way. Hence, yeah, it just takes a lot of time to hand sew everything and create the muscle tone underneath, but I think it's really worth it to create the realistic look to the dolls that I'm making, especially when I'm doing real animals. I want to make it as realistic as possible. So I'm using a combination of different types of fur. I always try to match the texture and length of the fur when I'm using multiple different types of fur. Otherwise it sort of ends up looking a bit weird, and you have different sort of thicknesses of the fur. So these ones were really close to the same texture and the same pile underneath. And basically I'm just going around and pinning a rough size of the fabric over the top of the body, and then I'll be hand sewing it together, which takes a long time. And I mean, if you've been around for a while, you know how much I hate hand sewing or sewing in general. But yeah, I think the process needs a bit more concentration on creating the body. So I use Gutermann thread, and it's a good quality thread. Just be careful when you're using cheaper thread. It tends to snap, and it's not as strong as a good quality thread. I also use upholstery thread as well, and that just provides a little bit more strength when you're using a ladder stitch to close, especially faux fur, because it's so thick. So I always tend to go for the thicker threads, just so I can have that tension. I can pull on that thread and get that tension to really close the pieces together. So once I've got the body shape, the torso bit sewn together, I can start working on the legs and the tail, and really bringing the doll together. So basically I sew up the legs first, and then close the doll by closing the tail. And the reason why I leave the tail open is because if I need to sort of add any of that polyfill anywhere just to bulk things up a little bit, I can still feed it into the back of the doll. So the legs were a little bit more complicated with this one because they had like a two-tone thing going on. But yep, I basically just cut out the pieces that I needed and sewed them together with that ladder stitch as well. And again, sewing that tail on and and I sewed the tail together like off screen and then attached it to the back end. So once you're happy with everything the way it's looking, I can then go and glue everything up. So I use a tacky fabric glue that I get from my local store called Spotlight. It dries really well and holds the clay and the fabric together really nicely. So this is what it looks like once I've applied the faux fur, given a little bit of a trim. And then it's basically just bringing out all those details that were lost when I added the fur to the face. So I'm cleaning up the eye area. You can see how sort of messy it is once I've cleaned it up. I will add some more detailing with some paints and fabric paints just to bring that face to life again. But I think adding these little details really finish the sculpture off and really bring it a personality. So I wanted this face to have more of like a stoic look to it, because I find all the images that I looked at, they all had like this stoic look to their face. So I wanted to capture that in my doll, which I think I did. It's a very unusual doll to sculpt. It is small and stocky, and it's got a really large head, and the head is disproportioned. So yeah, I found it an interesting one to sculpt because of that face that is disproportioned. But yeah, I think I achieved the look of the Tibetan sand fox. But yeah, adding some colours. So I've cleaned up the fur a little bit more just to make it a bit smoother and everything's more a single length. And then I'm going ahead and adding all the little details like the colouring. So my plan was to add the colouring to the lighter sand colour because the sand foxes have a lot of that darker sort of sand colouring on the top of their heads and then the back. They do vary in colour, I found. Once I looked at a lot of different images on Google, they had a lot of different colouring. So yeah, I think I achieved this one. This little one is sold, but I have a new critter coming up for a vote very soon. But yeah, check out my shop for more dolls at creaturesofnat.com. You can find me on TikTok, Facebook and Instagram at Creatures of Nat. And yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. I really appreciate it. You can check it out my Patreon as well. I have heaps of extra things on there. And I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!